Hey art friends, today we are learning how to draw one of Wyoming's very cute wildlife species. We're learning how to draw the pika, and we hope you're going to follow along. You'll need some art supplies. Some paper and pencil is really all that you need, but if you want to grab some other supplies, we recommend a graphite pencil and eraser, an 8.5 and 11-inch piece of paper. And any paper will do. If you want to get fancy, it can be nice to have a heavier weight paper, something like 98 pound. You may want to have some assorted colored pencils or markers, and a micron pen. We recommend like a black size 2 or similar fine line black pen. But once you have that, you are all set. So gather those supplies, and real quick before we begin, I want to introduce a very special guest who will be teaching this tutorial. She's the winner of this year's Governor's Art Award, and she'll be joining us from the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson. Everyone, help me give a warm welcome to Jane Levino. There she is in the classroom at the National Museum of Wildlife Art. She's the Chief Curator of Education, and thanks for joining us, Jane.
Thank you.
Yeah, so before we dive fully into the art tutorial, we're going to take a look at some images of the pika, and the reason why we're looking at the pika is because it's this year's species featured in the Conservation Stamp Art Contests. And the contest is sponsored by the Wildlife Fund. And in particular, we're teaching this for students. So if you know any Wyoming students, you can have them either join us live or watch later so that they can submit a pika into our contest and have a chance of winning up to $150. So Jane's going to show us how to get started on the artwork so we can hopefully submit something before the contest deadline, which is April 10th. So now we're going to take a look at the rest of the images and just pay attention to what you notice about the pika. Maybe you've seen them in the wild, maybe you haven't, but this is a good opportunity to take a lot closer look. I know for me, one of the first characteristics I notice are the ears of the pika. They're very large for how small they are. They're small bodied, usually about 6.5 to 8 inches with round ears. They resemble rabbits, a more rounded head with no visible tail, and their feet are quite large. Jane, do you have anything?
Yeah, I think this reference I think is especially good for showing the feet. You can see how that front foot that is closest to us at the front of the picture is kind of splayed out. The little digits on that foot are spread out, the toes, and you can see there are 4 of them. So that's why I love references like this. Some are better for some things, some are better for other things, but this one is great to see the foot and the toes.
In this one, you can start to compare some of the characteristics between photos too. So this one still has some rocks. You can tell the body position is similar. They're kind of in a seated position, I guess. This one image, I'm starting to notice characteristics about the eye and the nose. They're about the same size. The mouth has kind of got a triangular shape. Going on to this one, you start to notice more about the habitat. So here you can see it's eating a flower. Anything you notice about this one, Jane?
This one's great for the coloration on the fur. Notice the coat, it has some tan, it has some black, it has a little bit of grayish white there. So it's not just one solid brown color. There's some different tones in there.
And this one's fun because they've all been on rocks so far, but they've been kind of gray rocks, which is great. But maybe you want more color in your rocks, and it's good to know that they can be found on some bright red rocks as well. So if you want to add more color, that's something to consider.
Another thing to notice on that one, look at the You definitely see the front feet, but you can also see a back foot. Usually the back foot is not as visible when they're sitting back like that, but you often see it peeking out like that. The other thing I want you to notice here is how the whiskers come out from the front of near the mouth. They kind of come out and droop down a little bit. So take a close look at that.
Yeah, that's a great detail. And the longer you look, you start to notice some of those details that might not pop out to you right away. Right above the foot, I kind of notice how it narrows in a little bit, and then the feet are quite wide as well. They kind of expand out. But now that we've seen photos of them, now we have some exciting pieces from the National Museum of Wildlife Art in their collection, so you can see more of an artistic interpretation of the species. So Jane, let's go through some of these.
Okay, this one is by an artist named Dwayne Hardy, and he's an Idaho artist, but he used to live over here in Wyoming, and this painting I love. It's part of our, like I said, part of our collection, so I get to see it, fairly frequently. Notice how the pica is in its habitat. Again, you saw it in the photos. You're going to also see it in the artist's paintings and drawings. The pica is on a rock. That is how you see them. But also notice where the light is. Notice where he's put in little hint of the vegetation or the plants. Off to the left, you see some pieces of green grass coming up. Off to the right, you see another green plant down there. And notice in the mouth of the pica, more plants. So picas are very busy all summer long. They are harvesting plants because they store them up and eat those plants in the winter. So they're always scurrying around. And you may choose to show some plants around your pica. You may also choose to show some plants in their mouth because you often see them that way.
Yeah, and pica are found in alpine and subalpine habitats. They're often found in talus fields and like rock slide areas near coniferous forests.
Yes.
And so because of that, you'll notice that a lot of what they eat is shorter grasses and things like that too. So it's more of a rocky alpine environment than a lush, like meadowy sort of environment.
Yes. This is one by another artist. This one's not in our collection, but I thought it was a good example. And I want you here to notice how big the pica is as it fills its picture space. This is a contest for a conservation stamp. So you don't want to make your pica, tiny, just a small section of the paper you're working on. You want it to fill the paper. And sometimes I like to think about the size of your hand. And if you put your hand down on your 8.5 by 11 piece of paper, that's about how much space the pica should take up. Because imagine if a drawing gets shrunk down to the size of a stamp, and if the pica is small to begin with, it's going to be shrunk down even more to fit it onto a stamp. So do draw your pica fairly big when we get to that part. Here's one. This one I liked. I'm afraid I don't know the artist, but I love the artist's use of color here. Look at the little hints of lichen on the rock that pica is perched on. And then look at the color that's added from the wildflowers. It's some kind of aster, a daisy-like flower. And then look at what the pica is looking at. I want you to imagine, what if that bee was not there? You'd be wondering, there'd be this blank space and you'd be wondering, what is that pica looking at? So sometimes it's nice to have something interesting in front of the pica, whether it's a blooming flower or an insect. It can add a nice touch. This one is a scientific illustration, and I like it because it shows, once again, you can see the details, like definitely the front 2 feet. When we do our drawing, we're going to show the front 2 feet, and then there's going to be a suggestion of a back foot there. So you can see it there. I also want you to notice here the direction that the fur is growing. So if you are working to add color after we've done the drawing, either, using colored pencils or using watercolor paint or whatever you decide to use, your strokes or your brush strokes or the way that you draw is going to follow the direction the hair naturally grows. So in this case, look up by the neck, and then you can see the fur grows back towards the back of the animal, back to where the tail would be, even though we can't see the tail. Look at the detail. This is, we're getting into minutia here, but it's all important. Look at the fur around the muzzle, around the mouth, and the nose. Do you see it's a little bit lighter? There's more white in there. It's a little bit lighter in color than the tans and browns that make up the rest of the body. And then notice the color on the ears. They look darker than the rest of it. Sometimes if I'm not sure, I squint my eyes and look at it through squinted eyes, and it helps you to see the value. What's light, what's dark, what's something in between.
Yeah, and there's no visible tail, again, from this angle. So that's something to consider as well. And that belly's going to just be a little bit lighter.
Yep.
But yeah, those are all great details.
Okay, are we ready to draw?
Yeah, I think so. Take it away.
Okay. Chris, should I talk a little bit? Well, I'll talk a little bit about the requirements of the contest in terms of the size of paper and the orientation of the paper, I think, next. So Chris may have mentioned at the very beginning that we want you all to work on the required size for this contest, which is 8.5 by 11. And that is the same size that is typical copy machine paper. So if you have copy machine paper, you're all set. If you have a piece of drawing paper or watercolor paper, do check those dimensions and make sure that it's 8.5 by 11. The next thing I want to tell you is that the orientation of the paper is important for this contest. It needs to be horizontal, like I'm holding mine right now. Please do not hold your paper vertically. Make sure it's horizontal, because that's one of the rules for this contest. So the next thing we're going to do is we're just going to do some warm-ups. I hope you have a pencil, just a regular pencil. You won't be needing an eraser yet, but eventually you will need an eraser. So Chris, if we could switch to the view of my drawing here, what I want you to do first is, for the first warm-up, is we're going to draw a figure 8 lying on its side. So watch me here. This is just practice. It's to warm up. And you see how I'm drawing a figure 8 and I'm going around and around. This is a good warm up for drawing. As you're doing it, let your eyes follow left to right, left to right, and then try reversing it. Right to left, right to left. This is a really good warm up for anyone who's going to be doing some drawing. Not only does it warm up your arm, but it also warms up your kind of left brain, right brain. I always like to tell people your right brain is the creative side, what you use when you draw quite a bit. Left brain is when you're speaking. So especially because I'm speaking and drawing today, I want to make sure that I'm warming up my left brain and my right brain. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw some circles. And I want you to concentrate on using your whole arm like a lever when you're drawing the circles, not just like cramped little circle like that. So we're going to draw a fairly big circle around and around and around. And as you go around, try to perfect it so it's more of as close as you can get to a perfect circle. Maybe draw a smaller circle inside that. I'm still using my whole arm like a lever. I'm not being cramped up and just drawing like that. Let's draw a medium-sized circle. If you like to go counterclockwise, that seems to be my preferred way. Try one going the other way. Try one going clockwise. It's good warm up to go both directions. Maybe draw another big circle down here. Remember what I said about using your whole arm. Okay, how about some ovals next? And we're concentrating on these certain shapes because these are the shapes that make up the pica. So it's really specific why we're doing it this way. I want you to draw an oval like this. This might be the body of the pica. Try that. Try a medium sized oval. Try a narrow oval like that. Try an oval instead of on a slant like this. Try one that is sitting flat like that. And that would be maybe the head. So this will eventually become the head of the pica. This will eventually become the body of the pica. Other shapes I want you to try. How about an oval that comes to a point, almost like a teardrop? Can you try that? Should have sharpened my pencil before I got started today. Also, let's try some triangles. And if you're running out of space, you can put it inside the oval. That's fine. I want you to try a triangle like that, and then try a triangle with curved edges. Because when we get to the nose of the pica, it's going to be essentially a triangle, but it's not going to have sharp edges. It's going to have curved edges. And actually, it's not going to be oriented this way with the point on top. It's going to be oriented this way with the point on the bottom. So try drawing a triangle like that as well. Notice I'm going around it a few times just to make sure I get a feel for it, like that. Another thing I want you to draw is we're going to practice drawing small circles, which was going to become eventually the eye of the pica. Small circles like that. And then I want you to try adding a little triangle at this end and a little triangle at that end. The eye of the pica will have that little bit of a triangle at either end like that. Let's try shading it in like that for the eye of the pica. Okay, here's another thing to try. Let's try some whiskers. The whiskers, notice how fast I make those lines. It's where it starts and it goes whoosh. And then the other side too. Try that. Can you make those whiskers? And then I think the last thing I want you to try for a shape is a half circle. Just a half circle. It still should look like a circle, but it doesn't have to go all the way around. Try that the other direction. And then try a U shape. When we're working on the legs, one of the shapes we're going to start with is a U shape, kind of like that. Try another one. Okay. Are you feeling warmed up? Now, notice, get out, either flip your paper over. We're done with that warm-up paper, or get a fresh piece of paper if you want, either way. And we're going to, Chris is going to bring up our reference. This is the reference we're going to start with. But I want to talk first a little bit about original artwork. So maybe, Chris, you can come back to me for a second if I'm not on there, and need to talk about original. So notice we are, one of the I've been telling you about some of the rules of the contest. You have to do a pica. It has to be realistic, like biologically accurate. Chris kept referring to the background or the habitat. It should be where they actually live. So like in a rocky slope up high in the mountains. He mentioned coniferous trees like evergreens with cones, not like aspen trees or other trees that grow down lower. And then another rule is it must be an original work of art. And you might say, well, what does that mean? It means it has to be something you created and something that you did not copy. You didn't copy it exactly from somebody else's photograph. You didn't copy it exactly from somebody else's painting or drawing. Of course, the best thing would be to go out and see picas with your own eyes, maybe take photographs with your own camera. but we can't do that today. So we're using references, but you'll notice we're not going to copy any one reference. We might get ideas from this reference we're going to start with, but you'll notice that I'm going to go back and forth and look at details from other photos. So it is okay to pull from different references, like several different photographs, for example, but it's not okay. It wouldn't be okay for me to take this photograph we're using for a main reference and copy everything about it exactly like it looks in the photograph, unless I took the photo. So in other words, if I use this reference to position the shape of the body, I'm going to have it perched on, a different kind of rocky landscape. I'm going to include different types of plants. I might include the sky in the background. I don't want it to look exactly like that photograph because somebody created that composition artistically, a photographer did. And we shouldn't be copying anyone's work, whether it's a painter or an artist who works with pencil or whether it's an artist who works with a camera. I hope that makes that clear. Okay, so back to our reference. We're going to start with some shapes. And the first shape, I always, you might be wondering, where do I start? Where to start? The best place to start, I always find, especially with a animal who's you want to see clearly for a conservation stamp. And again, remember I said you make it big. You want it to be as big as your hand, approximately. So we're going to start with the animal first, and then we're going to think about the habitat or the landscape the animal is in after, because the most important thing is the animal for a conservation stamp piece of art. Okay, number one, look at the body, and we're going to draw an oval just to get started. I'm going to draw pretty dark with my pencil, but you should be drawing lightly in case you want to erase. I'm going to draw dark because I want you to see it. That's the reason. And once you've got that oval shape, look at it kind of with a critical eye and say to yourself, maybe that reference, the body shape, is actually a little bit longer than the oval I drew. So I'm going to extend it to the back end like that. And that's a little bit better to match my reference. Okay, if we go back to the photo reference now, we've got the basic body, but look at the head. So the head is like another oval, but it's positioned in a different way. It's positioned not tilted, but it's positioned sitting on top of the oval, but going straight across instead of tipped down. So go ahead and draw an oval for the head. And remember, this is just to get you started. You can eventually come in here and look more carefully, look more closely, and perfect it. But that's a good start. Okay, we're going to stop there for that. Now look at the front legs. Remember I had you drawing some U shapes? Look at we're going to draw a U shape for that front leg, and we're going to start this U right under, like midway on the oval for the head. And we're going to come down, and it's going to get narrower at the bottom, and it's going to come down kind of like that, a U shape that kind of comes to a point at the end. And then we're going to draw another U shape that comes down. So these are the two front legs, U shape that kind of comes narrow, U shape. And then, then you can get a little more critical, and you can say, it's not straight down on that front leg, the one that juts out farthest. It's not straight right here, but instead it has a gentle curve to it, more like that. And then we're going to think about the feet. Again, we're going to come back and perfect it. Don't worry about that. So at the end of one of those U shapes, there is a foot, and the foot has a narrower ankle right there. And then it splays out. Remember, we talked about the feet being a little bit big and kind of splaying out as if you were to open the fingers on your hand. The toes are opened up a little bit like that. So we're going to create the ankle and the foot on each of those front feet. Notice the front feet are not pointing out towards the bottom of my paper, but they are pointing out towards the right side of my paper. And again, do you remember how many toes they have? Looks like mine is incorrect right now. They have to have 4 toes. So I'm going to make sure I add 4 toes, especially on that foot that is closest to me. 1, 2, 3, 4. You can still see 4 on the other foot too. Look really closely at the toenails on the edge of the toes. There are some little black toenails. It's hard to see here, but if we were to go back and look at some of our other references, we would definitely see those little black toenails. Okay, so now let's think about the back foot. So this reference is, you can see just a little bit of that foot on the back foot, a little bit peeking out. Some of our other references, you might remember seeing it a little bit more. So actually, I want you to think back to some of the other references that showed it more, because I want to show it even more. I think not that one, not that one. Which one? That one maybe. Look at that foot. You can see that back foot. You can actually count the toes on that back foot. Sometimes the foot is just peeking out, like in that reference there. Other times it kind of is sitting on its back haunches, and the foot is kind of peeking out more at a kind of an angle like that. And again, I'm going to show the toes. 1, 2, 3, 4, with the little tiny black toenails coming out of them, kind of like that. Do we draw a tail? No. They do have tails, by the way, but they are under all that thick fur, and they are not visible. So please do not draw a tail on there. Okay, let's go back to the looking closely at the face. We're going to start to draw the face now. So notice the position of the eye. The position of the eye is up. It's circular in shape. It's a round eye, and it's up closer to the top of the head. It's not at the midpoint. It's up closer to the top of the head, and it is fairly round, right? And remember when Chris pointed out that the nose is almost on a straight line with the eye. So if I were to pull my pencil across from the eye, I'm going to come to the top of the nose. And the nose, remember when we practiced drawing triangles, small triangle, upside down triangle with the point going down? That's what we're going to do for the nose. So go ahead and draw a little triangle upside down with the point down for the nose. And then for the mouth, there's a line that comes down from the nose. And then the mouth, in this case, the mouth was a little bit open, like it was doing its little chirping sound. They're very vocal little animals, and they make like a little squeaky toy noise, like eep. So that one's making its noise. It's communicating with other picas. It's maybe warning them that a hiker is coming by, and its mouth is open in a triangle going the opposite direction. So you might want to put that in. Then let's think about the ear. Chris mentioned earlier they have fairly big ears, and the ears are quite circular in shape. Remember I had you drawing like a half a circle for practice? And the circle, it's going to go right about here for the ear. Did I make it big enough? Let's check back in with our reference for a second. I have a feeling I did not make it big enough. Okay, so we're going to make it a little bigger, and I'm going to come in there and make it just a little bit bigger than I had it. And I'm going to erase all my extra lines inside here that I don't need anymore. I'm also going to erase some of these guidelines that we started out with. And now we're going to make a little bit of a change here. I started with a pretty much a perfect oval here, a symmetrical oval. But actually, if we look back at our reference, the head isn't quite shaped like a perfect oval. Instead, it kind of goes up here, and then it slopes down to the nose. like that. So I'm going to get rid of some of my extra. It's getting confusing here with all my extra lines. So I'm going to have it slope slightly up and then slope down to the nose like that, like that. That's a little better. It's got kind of almost like a peak, like the peak of a roof right up there. The next thing that I'm going to change again is I want to show both ears. I don't know. It just looks to me, some of those references we had, you could see the hint of the other ear back behind. So remember, again, it's going to still be circular. Going to be a little bit less of it showing. Oh, that's a great example. I'm going to change what I was doing. Look at that back ear. Ours is in a little bit different position because it's turning to face us, but I'm going to make a little bit of suggestion of an ear back on that other side, just because it feels like it balances out the head a bit better. Now I'm going to come in with my eraser and get rid of some of these other lines that we don't need and don't want, like that one, like this heavy line here. I can have a faint line here, but I don't want a heavy line. The ankle where the foot where the foot joins the fatter part of the leg, I'm going to erase that line because I don't want people to see that. And where the belly, I'm going to make the belly come down a little lower because my perfect oval didn't allow for enough of a belly. See how on our reference, the belly is just about touching the rock. So in my sketch, I'm going to bring the belly down a little bit. Well, that's getting better. Again, I'm going to keep coming in here and perfecting my lines and erasing what I don't need. What else do we need here? We need whiskers, right? So remember we practiced, you can do like little whiskers coming out that way and little whiskers coming out on the other side, going off into the air like that. And look at the ear. Remember on our reference, we said the ear was darker than the rest of the animal. If we go back to the reference, you can see the rim of the ear, right? So I'm going to leave the rim of the ear kind of white. Oh, I have too many lines here. I need to come back and clean it up a little bit more. But the rim of the ear is pretty much white, but then the inner part of the ear, maybe that's hard for you to see. I'm going to make it darker than you would be making yours just so you can see it. And then sometimes they have some fur right here at the front of the ear. Sometimes you can see some darker if you want to do just a little bit of shading to remind yourself that it's going to be darker inside the ear. Okay, what else is dark? Squint your eyes a little bit and you can see, oh, the eye is pretty dark. I'm going to do a little bit of shading there, and inside the mouth, it's dark, right? And the nose is pretty dark, actually. So I'm shading a little bit there too. Okay, so now your pica, you could do a few suggestions of hair. If you remember what I told you about, remind yourself which direction the hair grows. So if you were to start to suggest a little bit of the hair, it's not going to go like straight up, right? It's going to think about when you pet your cat or your dog, the hair goes that direction. So you could suggest a few. They do have really thick fur, so it's probably a good idea to suggest some of that fur. Okay, I'm going to do a quick time check here, see how we're doing. I think it's time to perhaps think about background a little bit. So I want you to think about the references that we showed you and think about the fact that, yes, there should be some rock in there. In fact, the pica probably should be standing on a rock, whether it's a boulder or a bigger rock and it's a big boulder or a small boulder, whether it's, perched on it on a slope. That we kind of drew it in a way that it's not going to be climbing up a rock, right? It's going to be perched at the top of a rock, it looks like to me. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to draw in a rock for it to be sitting on. And we don't all have to draw it the same. Yours could look different from mine. But what I'm going to do is I am going to, if we want to go back to my drawing here, I'm going to create the rock that it's standing on. And I'm going to it's going to come like under the back foot, and it's going to kind of come behind the front feet there for me. And then I'm going to have the rock kind of slope down. Mine's going to be standing on a kind of a big rock. And then behind it here, I'm going to taper the rock down. Just, I don't want the front of the rock to look exactly like the back of the rock, because that seems a little boring to me. So I'm going to make it slope down in a different way there. So that's the rock mine's going to be standing on. And maybe you see on this reference, you can kind of see some rocks in the background. I'm not going to make it just like that, but I am going to suggest some rocks in the background. Like maybe there's another one over here. Maybe there's another one that comes down over there, and another one that comes up over there. So suggest a few rocks, whatever looks good to you. Okay, what about the rest of the background? Again, you can draw upon references that we saw in some of our photos, or you can think about when you've been out hiking maybe, and you've even seen a pika, and think about the landscape, think about, are there going to be mountains in the background? Keep reminding yourself, yes, the habitat in the background is somewhat important, but the pika is the most important thing. So at this point, you don't want to get too carried away. You don't want to, create a whole town back there behind it, or a whole mountain range back there behind it, or a herd of bison back there behind it. They'd be too low anyway. What other animals might you see up high? Don't create a whole herd of mountain goats behind it, or bighorn sheep. It's just too distracting. We want it to be about the pika. But you could, sometimes I've seen pika up near a mountain lake. So I might want to have just a suggestion of some water behind it in mind to fill that background space a little bit. So what I'm drawing here is the edge of the lake behind it. And maybe I like the idea of some mountains suggested behind it. What you don't want to do is create a mountain that goes right through the head. So watch what I'm going to do with my suggestion of a mountain behind it. I'm going to make it higher than the pika's head, so it doesn't detract from that. And maybe I just suggest a little bit of a mountain coming up or going down like this. Again, don't make it too complicated, because it might take away from the pika. And like I said, you don't want anything to go right through the pika's head. The simple line of the lake going through, that's not too confusing or distracting. But I wouldn't want to get too crazy with details. It suggests a mountain landscape with some rocks and a lake behind, but it doesn't take away from the pika. You always want to ask yourself, what's the most important thing in this drawing? Hopefully the answer is the pika. That's the thing you want people to focus on. Okay, then let's talk a little bit about if you want to add some suggestions of plants. That's probably important, because like we said, the pika is busy all summer harvesting grasses and wildflowers and other plants. Once when I was out hiking, I was hiking over the rocks, and I came upon, it looked like a beautiful little bouquet of wildflowers that someone had left on the rock. And then I realized the pika had been picking the flowers and the grasses and created what looked like a little bouquet and left it on the rock to dry in the sun. So they pick the plants, they leave them on a sunny rock, they let them dry, and then they put it in a sheltered place, like maybe under the edge of a rock, and they create a whole haystack of dried grasses and plants that they will keep visiting in the winter to eat for their nourishment throughout the winter. Sometimes their haystacks, get buried in the snow, and they have to dig them out a little bit. They do not hibernate through the winter like some of the other mammals do. They have to scurry all summer long to gather enough grasses to dry for the winter. So back to our drawing, we're going to do some plants. And so we're going to suggest some grasses or wildflowers. I think on my drawing, I'm going to think about an aster, which is a plant kind of like a daisy, and I'm going to have it growing off to this side of the rock. and I'm going to, I draw my stems first. Whenever I'm drawing flowers, I draw my stems first because that helps me to know where the leaves will go and where the head of the flower will go. So if those are my stems, then I would come in and I would, like I said, these are going to be asters, maybe cone flowers, which is like a daisy with kind of a center that looks kind of like a cone. I'm going to draw the center of the flowers a little higher than where the stem stops, and you'll see why in a minute. So I have my stem, and then I have the centers of the flower up here. Then when I add the petals, there's room underneath to add some petals there, and a little room on top to add some more. I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to add some petals like that, and I'm going to do the same thing here underneath. And then I'm going to add some leaves. And you can decide a different kind of flower. You don't have to make the same kind that I am. Think about when you've been out in the Wyoming in the summertime, maybe out hiking, and think about, what types of flowers you saw when you were up high like that. Maybe some phlox. Maybe you saw some, just some little tiny grasses growing up there high in the cracks of the rock. So that's something to think about. But we do want to suggest some plants because the plants are so important to the pica. Okay, should we think about color? Now we're getting to some of the decisions we made along the way make it a little bit easier for us to then get into the point of color. But again, I'm going to ask you to focus on the pica first, because that is the most important thing. I don't want you to put all your energy and ideas into the background and then you're getting kind of tired of it and you're like, oh, I'm just going to grab a brown pencil and color in the pica. I want us to think a little bit harder about that. So now you're getting to make some choices as an artist. What I'm going to do, and this is something I sometimes do, especially if I'm doing artwork that I want to read really clearly, like for a stamp. Remember what I said, it's going to be shrunk down and it's going to be on a stamp. So you want it to really be, the pica to really stand out. So this is where I'm going to come in with my micron pen. I'm going to put it here so you can see it. A micron pen is just a fine line pen or marker. Chris mentioned earlier, they come in different thicknesses. So this one is called a size 2. You can buy them even thinner than this, and you can certainly buy them that make a thicker line than this. But I'm going to come in here and I'm going to start with my darkest darks. The eye is quite dark. And earlier, remember we said there's a little triangle off to the right side and a little triangle off to the left side to get the shape of the eye, right? So there's my eye. The nose is pretty dark, so I'm going to come in here and I'm going to draw the nose, that upside down triangle with rounded edges, and it's pretty dark, so I'm going to fill it in. I'm going to do my detail with the mouth down below, the open mouth. It's doing its little squeaky noise. I'm going to put in my whiskers that I had done in pencil. I'm going to put them in pen like that so they are a little more visible. Then I'm just going to kind of come in here and outline with my micron pen some of the important details, whether it's the black little nail on the foot, whether it's the toe, whether it's the shoulder or the thicker part of the leg that comes down. This is the time, whether you're using a pencil, a colored pencil, or a micron pen like I am, this is the time to really emphasize what you want to make sure people notice about your pica. You want it to really jump out. You don't want any of this to get lost. I was telling Chris earlier when we first started, you think the pica you think it's going to be an easy animal to draw. It is not an easy animal to draw. It has so much thick fur that it's hard to see the musculature or the skeletal distinction where the bends are, like in our elbows or in our, where the spine is. I think it makes it harder to draw because it could just turn into looking like a marshmallow. So now you want to put in as much definition as you can, subtle things you notice about the shape of the jaw, the shape of the back, the shape of the legs, the shape of the back end, the shape of the back foot. Make sure those details are just how you want them. And if you're not sure about your drawing, maybe you just want to make it in darker pencil before you go to a pen. And then when you're ready to add color, whether it's paint or whether it's, I'm looking at my colors that I have available here, whether it's paint or whether it's watercolor, I think I'm gonna show you what I'm gonna use right now. These are some watercolor brushes. It's called a watercolor brush pen, and it's these were bought from Blick Art Supply online, and I'm having a lot of fun with them lately. But whether you have whatever you have, whether it is watercolor pens like I have, or whether it's colored pencils, I want you to pull out a brown color, and I want you to pull out a black color. And what else did we say we saw in the fur? A tan color. Is that tan? It's a reddish brown. Well, since I don't have a tan, I'm going to pull out the reddish brown. It will have to do. And what I'm going to do is we can go, look closely before we switch to my drawing. Maybe look really closely and notice where it's darker towards the back behind the front leg. As you get to the back and the rump, it's a little bit darker right there. Where it's lighter, right on the chest there, it looks lighter. And then when we look at the head, it's pretty light too, kind of similar to the chest, but it's and then white right around the mouth, right? More whitish. Okay. So because I have watercolor pens, I'm going to come in, and it's going to be a little faster than a colored pencil. I'm going to just start filling in. And one thing I'm going to think about is layering. Notice how I'm coming in with this pen. You can do this with colored pencils too. And you can kind of show the direction of the hairs. I'm doing that right now. But then, and I'm going to kind of outline it too with this brownish color. Same thing on this side, maybe across the belly there, onto the foot. I want to give it some pigment, or, in this case, some of the paint. And then I'm going to come in with these pens, work really nice with it's called a watercolor brush. You could also do this with a regular paintbrush dipped in water, but I'm going to come in here and start blending. If I do it fast enough, I may not have done it fast enough. If I do it fast enough, I can blend like that and get it to, I was too slow. Another thing is, if you have watercolor paper, it's a little slower to dry because it soaks it up, and you can start doing more with the blending. But you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to switch to the dark color now. And I'm going to come in. Remember we said there it was like darker towards the back? I'm going to add a little bit of those darker colors towards the back. You may notice that I talk less when I'm working on my art, because it's hard to talk and make art at the same time. Right now, the problem I'm running into is that I am working on copy paper instead of watercolor paper. So I'm going to switch, actually. I did a drawing on watercolor paper before you all joined us here. And I want to show you here what I was talking about, how nice it can be to add some color if you have some watercolor paper, and then quickly come in with a brush soaked in. You see how that's blending much more nicely? watercolor paints blend a lot better on watercolor paper than as opposed to working on copy machine paper. Watercolor does not work well at all on copy machine paper, which is, if you have copy machine paper and you like your drawing, please don't do watercolor. Please use colored pencils or markers instead. So let's say, hopefully you're getting a feel now for how to add color to the pica. I'm going to add the eye there. I'm going to add the nose here now that I have the right paper, and the mouth. Hopefully you are just going ahead and you know what you're doing. I'm going to add those little black claws down here, the nails on the feet with this nice thing. And I'm going to come in with this other pen. Let me check out this color. See, it has a slightly different color brown, which I actually like that, because when we looked at that one reference, you could see that, right? You could see all those different colors. You could see where it had some brownish color here. I'm going to add some strokes here, and then I'm going to come in with my watercolor brush and kind of blend it before it's too late, like that. See how nicely that blends the color? Again, it works well, but you have to have the right kind of paper. You have to have the watercolor paper, not the copy machine paper. Okay, I'm going to add some more of that paint here, and before it completely dries, I'm going to come in again with my watercolor brush, and I'm going to blend it. And if you have a more traditional set of watercolor paints, it works essentially the same. This is just faster because I don't have to have a separate pan of water that I keep dipping into. But the idea is the same. And if you have a regular traditional set of watercolor paints, it will work just fine. I'm going to come back to the ear. We said there was some dark colors in the ear. And I'm just going to add a little bit of color with my pigment, with my watercolor brush pen. And then I'm going to just blend it with plain water, because it will start to thin it out. So it won't be too dark, the black. It will be a much lighter black color. Do you remember what color the feet were? I think they were kind of grayish, almost grayish whitish. So I'm making the feet a very pale gray, which is almost white. I haven't done the face yet, have I? Okay, I'm going to come back to the face with my brownish color, and I'm going to make my strokes go the same direction the fur grows. Think about how you're petting your dog or your cat. Which way does the fur grow? And then you can come in with your watercolor pen and blend it before it dries. So hopefully you've added a little bit of color to that, just to get a sense. Keep in mind, Chris and I, we didn't expect you to have a finished drawing ready to submit to the contest. I mean, you may decide you don't even want to submit to the contest, which is fine. But if you do want to, I'm guessing you're going to want to spend more time on it than we have today. You might decide to use the drawing you did as you started out with today, or you might decide to get a totally new piece of paper, whether it's a new piece of copy machine paper or a new piece of watercolor paper or a new piece of drawing paper, and start all over again. That's perfectly fine. When we switch back to Chris, he's going to tell you when you have to, the deadline is, and when you have to submit it by. But to finish off your drawing, you're going to finish the colors of the pica, you're going to finish the details. Sometimes I like to do what's called mixed media, which means you might start with watercolor for your background colors, and you might add colored pencil for details. You have to wait till the watercolor dries before you do that, but that's a fun way to work mixed media. Once you've got the pica just the way you want it, start working on the background, adding color to the background. You might want to do a watercolor wash on the lake if there's a lake behind there, a watercolor wash on the sky, a watercolor wash on the mountains, and then when you get to the plants, switch to either a fine-tipped colored pencil or a fine-tipped pen or marker, and do it that way. But Chris, I think we're going to switch back to you.
Yeah, we'll wrap things up, but feel free to keep going on your artwork, and we look forward to seeing those. I've dropped a submission form link in the chat, so find that in the comments and you can go to that link and submit your artwork once you're satisfied with it. This is for the Student Conservation Stamp Art Contest, which is open to any Wyoming student, and you may be working on it in class, but if not, you're welcome to submit artwork on your own. There are 4 grade level categories. We have categories for kindergarten through 2nd grade, 3rd through 5th grade, 6th through 8th grade, and 9th through 12th grade. And as I mentioned, the winner in each grade level category will get $150. Second place gets $100, and third place gets $50. So hopefully that's motivation to enter and see how you do. But we always look forward to seeing the great student artwork that's submitted every year, and we're certainly looking forward to seeing all those picas roll in. So submit those before April 10th. Let's give Jane a big thank you for taking the time today to show us how to draw pica. It's always a lot of fun, Jane, to see how we start from just some basic shapes to even what you have now is incredible. So thanks for joining us today. And I want to also encourage everyone, if you get the chance to stop into the National Museum of Wildlife Art in Jackson Hole, they have a student exhibit up right now that's featuring K through 12th grade artwork from students around Teton County. So check that out and get your inspiration there. But that's all I have. Am I forgetting anything else, Jane, before we hop up?
I'm just going to say one last thing, and that is about art contests. So art contests are tricky things, and it's very difficult for the judges. I am not judging this contest, but I have judged similar contests in years past. And just because if you win, great. There are lots of prizes and you might win. But if you don't win, it does not mean you are not a good artist. They can't give prizes to everything, and some of the best works of art probably will not win. Keep in mind that whoever is judging it, they have different likes and dislikes, just like you do. You might have a favorite color. Somebody else might have a different favorite color. You might like one style of drawing. Someone else likes something else. So please keep in mind that you might not win, and it doesn't mean you're a bad artist. You're still a very good artist.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point. And, for folks who can't enter the art contest because either they're a student outside of Wyoming or they're older and just want to draw, I think there's a lot of value in just creating art. So hopefully you got value out of today's tutorial. Again, the contest is sponsored by the Wildlife Fund, so we'd really like to thank them for making the prizes possible. And yeah, we appreciate everyone joining us today. Hope you have a great rest of your evening and take care.
Thanks, everyone.